Hey, it's Sarah Burke here from the Women in Media podcast. And before we get started on a new episode, could I get you to hit like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell, whichever app you do your podcast listening in. Make sure you're all set up so you know when there's a new episode and you can help spread the word. Oh, and if you're so inclined, could I ask you to leave a review if the app that you're using does that? You're the best. All right, let's get to the show. I'm Sarah Burke, and this is the Women in Media podcast. I'm thrilled to be back at it with new episodes after taking a little summer break to enjoy the lake with the fam. But it's time to get new episodes rolling, especially this week with the 2022 International Ice Hockey Federation World Junior Championship in Edmonton. A quick note before we jump in with my fantastic guest. At the time of this episode's release, the federal government has frozen Hockey Canada's funding after we learned the organization had settled a lawsuit with a woman who alleged she was sexually assaulted by members of the 2018 men's junior team in London, Ontario. Since, we've also learned that members of the 2003 team are under investigation for similar behavior in Nova Scotia. Investigations are ongoing. It's possible you know today's guest as the frontwoman of Canadian rock band Joydrop, but maybe you also know her from morning television or maybe even Rogers Hometown Hockey.
I think I've been punished sort of overtly and covertly for speaking my mind at times. I think there were some gigs I didn't necessarily get. Working in hockey is hard, but when you have seen the beauty of the game, then you can't turn your back.
My guest today is an actress-turned-rockstar-turned-broadcaster, Tara Slone. Someone warned me that your name was Tara, not Tara. Tara Slone.
It's true. I'm a Tara. I used to be very indignant about it when I was younger. It's Tara, not Tara. But now I don't correct people. But sure, Tara.
Over that now. Well, it's certainly been an eventful few weeks in sports, especially here in Canada, but also some news about your career at the time of recording this. It's late July. And you've just sort of announced your news that you and Sportsnet are no longer. And I read the Athletic article, which I thought summed up, a wonderful experience, but how you're not really done. And there's still some things that you definitely want to accomplish. How are you feeling a couple weeks of reflecting later?
It's weird. It's a strange experience because I think we all kind of saw it coming. The last 2 years of doing hometown hockey have been very difficult. We were pulled off the road, of course. And then our last season, we did 14 out of 25 stops. So, we were halted mid-season. And so we were a bit of a COVID casualty. So I think to us, that plus the fact that it had been 8 years, we've been to 150 plus communities. And it had that feeling like it had run its course. Of course, you could get to so many more beautiful communities, but had an inkling that this was coming, that change was in the air. So I had emotionally sort of prepared myself for this, but I don't know. You can prepare all you want, but when you hear the words canceled, you're like, oh.
It's a big part of your life too, 8 years.
Yeah. It hurts to leave this team. So many of us have been there right from the very start. It was a very collaborative show and a lot of emotional investment. And a lot of really wonderful and experiences and learnings. So I will miss my colleagues a great deal, but I feel so good about the legacy that we have left behind.
I was going to say there's almost like a bit of a bigger picture legacy for that show, but also like a personal legacy for you. Talk about the differences between those two things.
Well, I think that hometown hockey actually blazed a bit of a trail. I think at the time of its inception, we were telling stories that weren't really told on national hockey broadcasts. I think you see more of those kinds of features and that kind of storytelling now. But we delved into some really difficult areas. We talked about sexual abuse and mental health and sickness and overcoming challenges and racism. So I think we approached a lot of topics, and I think it was really the only show of its kind. Of course, there was Hockey Day in Canada once a year and Craft Hockeyville once a year, but the fact that we were able to showcase communities across the country 25 weekends a year was made it really different and really special. And for me, I'm proud to have been part of it. It was, a blessing. It was, I'm just enormously humbled that these communities let us come in. They kind of gave us the red carpet treatment and they thanked us, but really we didn't deserve the thanks. It's them who deserve to be thanked profusely. So it was just, it was an amazing experience. And for me, I think it also really cultivated where my heart lives now, which is promoting equity in sport and change in culture and women in sport. So I have Hometown Hockey to thank for that as sort of a launching pad to what I think will be the next chapter.
And there's lots to talk about there, but I do want to hear the story. Like I read about you hustling your way into that. And I just feel like that's a story that I need to get on the podcast as well. Like reach out to someone pretty high up and Rogers and be like, I want this. How did that happen?
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about writing a letter. So basically I was working at City TV in Calgary. I was hosting Breakfast Television there. City TV is owned by Rogers. Sportsnet is owned by Rogers. I had already crossed paths with Scott Moore, who was the president then of Sportsnet. And I was doing some smaller gigs. I was doing some CHL games and some provincial curling championships. And I wanted to get my foot in the door. So I did have a relationship with him. It wasn't exactly a cold call, but it wasn't exactly a big fish either. And I was on one of those curling gigs and there was a producer named Rick Briggs-Jude. And a lot of sports people will know exactly who he is. And I said, I read about this thing called Rogers Hometown Hockey. I want to do it. He said, well, do they know that? And I said, well, no. He said, well, you better tell them. So that's what I did. I wrote Scott Moore a letter and I think I have it somewhere on my desktop.
It should be on like your wall.
Yeah. And I do think it's the moral of the story is if you don't put your name out there, they're never going to know you're interested. So what do you have to lose? They could say no, or in my case, they could say yes. Yeah. And so, yeah.
So your name is obviously like, people know you as someone who's been in the music scene and then, the morning television hosting and then broadcasting in sort of the latest chapter. Where did all of this sort of public spotlight start for you? What did you first want to do? Was it music, or could you have, when you were like a little girl, seen yourself doing TV?
No, it was music, but it wasn't rock music. As much as I loved rock music and I worked at Sam the Record Man all through high school, I wanted to be an opera singer. And that's what I really studied hard, starting from when I was about 12. I took lessons. I was in every single choir. I was in the Canadian Children's Opera Chorus. That's what I did. And that's where I started my university path, and fizzled out really quickly because, frankly, I did not have the discipline. In high school, you can kind of get away with being like, practicing a little and still being good. And then you get into the university setting where everybody's really good. And if you don't practice, you're done. And let's face it, I was 18. I just didn't have it. So that's what I wanted to do. And then from there, I thought, well, I wanted to keep performing. And that's when I ended up going to theater school. And I mean, one thing sort of beget the next. Nothing is really that far-fetched. Yep. And broadcasting, it wasn't something that I had contemplated, but it seemed like a combination of all the things I had already done. And when I first entered the broadcasting world, it was in entertainment. So that to me made a lot of sense. I've been interviewed lots in my life, and I knew at least what it was like to have a bad interview, and I knew what it was like to have a good interview. I knew when somebody hadn't done their homework and how that affected me as an interview subject. So everything kind of one thing led to another. It's not as weird as it seems.
Yeah. Well, what's a bad interview for you and what's a good interview for you? And talk about it from both sides of that. It's so interesting that you have been on both sides.
Yeah. I mean, I think, my first experiences were as a musician putting out albums. You put your heart and soul into this product. And it was really just a matter of somebody who was curious, interested, and engaged and invested and did a little bit more digging than just reading
what the single was.
Yeah, or came across their desk or asked questions like, what's the album about? You know, you can tell, and it's the same. It's in music and in any form of media. When you have somebody who is curious and listening, I think that in itself just creates a space where you want to talk and you want to open up and you're going to give your best answers. So I had a lot of those experiences where it was either somebody hadn't done their homework, or it veered off into, oh, you're a chick in rock.
Woohoo.
Yeah. You're hot. So, like, you know, there was a shock jock era too. We had a lot of those kind of.
Totally. From like your first lesson learned as a broadcaster, what was something that maybe caught you off guard when you got into broadcasting?
Well, I can tell you a real story. This is what caught me off guard was how nervous I was. I mean, I'm not trying to like pump myself up, but you know, with Joydrop, we'd played in front of 25, 30,000 people at festivals. I had done Rockstar INXS, which was, you know, we had I dare say an audience of millions occasionally. So I had done things that were nerve-wracking, big, sang anthems at hockey games and basketball games. And I worked at Sun TV. That was my first television job. And for those people who don't remember, because many people will not, Sun TV was a little tiny station in Toronto that the Sun Media Network was just holding on to. It eventually became Sun News Network. I did not work there. But so it was a tiny little station that had to have some local programming. And I don't know how many people watched it, but like not a lot. And I remember doing one of my first double enders. Double enders is kind of like, well, like what we're doing, like in boxes, right?
Okay.
And I got so nervous that I basically had a panic attack.
On screen.
And it was, I mean, nobody caught it. It was a little bit on the cusp of the YouTube era. But I like ducked out of frame. I literally, that was it. So, you know, it was a real wake up call. And first of all, I came in exhausted, hungover, honestly. I'd been living a different lifestyle and I had to get my shit together. Discipline wise, you know, I had to really change the way that I lived, and I had to be aware that actually I have nerves that I have to confront.
Yeah. So that's a bit of a lesson in, like, I guess you'd call it preparation, right? And even the way that you like target your curiosity towards the subject would be way different if you're not really, if you're not in the right mindset. So
100%.
I hear that. What's your most memorable interview in, like, you know, just like you felt so good walking away from it? And it can be from any era of your career. I always wish I asked this question. I always forget to.
God, you know, we've done so many. And, you know, I always think that I've interviewed tons of famous people and that's really cool always. But to me, it's always the ones where you are able to create a safe space. Because a lot of people come in vulnerable, you know, either it makes them nervous, like sitting in front of these lights studios are very quiet, or it's a sensitive topic. I think today, as we record this, today is the day that the papal visit started in Canada, and the Pope is making basically a tour and apologizing to First Nations in Canada for the residential school system, or the part that the Catholic Church played. Present at his first stop was Chief Wilton Littlechild, who is a remarkable man. He's a residential school survivor himself, and he was a guest of ours at Enoch Cree Nation, which was our first hometown hockey First Nations hosted visit. So I would say that's certainly among them. I mean, that stands out to me, I think, in particular today. This he was like a Buddha, Wilton little child. He's this amazing, wise, calm presence. But to be present in his space, and I feel like be able to create the environment, the sort of container for him to speak his truth, that stood out to me.
What do you think is going through his head today?
He was part of the papal delegation that went to the Vatican, and I think it has to be very, very meaningful. I haven't had a chance yet to see. He did speak this morning, so I will go back and watch that. But this is there are obviously a lot of people with a lot of emotion all over the place, but it will just be very meaningful to him.
I think a lot of people know your name to be synonymous with speaking out and taking action on some of these difficult topics, like you said, that aren't always represented properly in the media. Yeah. When did you first feel comfortable to start using your platform like that? Because I imagine that even though we're saying broadcasting as in sports or in entertainment, there's definitely some ties there. I imagine that something from the Joydrop era led to this in the sports era.
Yeah, I've definitely taken the bull by the horns more in the last few years. But for sure, I think it's a result of feeling both marginalized and empowered. I know what it's like to be a woman in a male-dominated field or fields. I know what it's like to be a woman in the world. I also recognize the privilege of being a white woman, yeah. Of means, and a cisgendered het woman. And so, I recognize all of that. I've always, I just, ever since I was a kid, I've always had a deep sense of fairness, or what I think is just and unjust. So I know I've always been that kid to speak out. If you wanted to argue about feminism in grade 11, that would have been me.
Yeah.
But I remember using my voice at times when I was in Joydrop, but also sometimes not feeling empowered to do that and regretting it later. So, I think just as I get older, certainly hometown hockey, fueled that fire in me and also gave me the platform. And I recognize that it could be useful, and I could use it for what I think of as good and positive change. And I recognize that, it hasn't made me everybody's cup of tea. We
love it though.
Well, listen, and I love you for that. I think, the people that I want to align myself with, are aligned with that. So it's, sure, I'm not going to land a job in certain places probably because of it, but I don't want to work there anyway.
Right.
And again, that's a very privileged thing to say. I recognize that as well.
Is Twitter your favorite? It seems like Twitter's one of your favorite platforms to use.
To me, it's the most effective for that kind of dialogue. I'm better at it. It's certainly more newsy and more topical. I guess no, I'm not going to say I use them all, because I'm not even venturing into TikTok land. I feel like it could be so time consuming that I just don't think it's a good idea. But yeah. Yes, for sure. Twitter has been, it's also to me the most toxic. So you have to be really careful. But for me, especially during the pandemic, when we all felt so alienated, that's where I found a lot of community. There are a lot of people in sports and hockey in particular who are really trying to affect change, and that has also fueled my fire.
Yeah, and we cannot have this conversation actually without referencing, a statement that was just made today. Like I said, we're recording late July right now, and a statement's just come out from the Canadian national women's hockey team about everything going on with Hockey Canada. And, I know that people are going to your Twitter on a day like today, or even when the story was first circulating, wondering what does someone this respected like Tara Slone, what does she have to say about something like this? And I think people have really come to respect, what you have to say on topics like this. Is it safe to say that, I mean, you heard these stories years ago, even though the public is just hearing them now?
I mean, I certainly didn't know, as we speak right now, the big horrific stories that have come out are about the 2018 junior
2003
team and the 2003. I certainly didn't know anything about that. But I mean, do I have an awareness that it's a completely, a hotbed of toxic masculinity, of bullying, of non-consensual activity? That's not a secret to anyone. And it's sort of top down, so I think my line of the last few days when I've been doing press is I'm shocked and I'm not surprised. And so, in a lot of ways, I'm grateful that these stories are emerging. I'm grateful that there are people in power who are taking it very seriously. And I'm grateful that, if this acts as a catalyst, because, not everything does. I think there are a lot of us who thought what happened with Kyle Beach would act as a catalyst, and I think maybe we're still waiting. So, but this does seem like the house of cards is about to topple. So, I'm glad that people are taking notice, and I think there's a lot more ahead.
So in the spotlight, when you comment on something like Kyle Beach, I remember reading about some NHLers who had an opinion right away and said, "Oh, not doing anything with Sportsnet ever again," because of comments like that. What goes through your mind when you hear that?
Well, I think I know who you're talking about. No, I mean, that was Twitter. That was a little Twitter thing. Things, people get heated and political. I mean, no NHLer can say that. Sportsnet holds the rights to the NHL. So it was just a little Twitter tiff, I suppose. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, listen, we're all paying attention, and we're not going to have the same opinions on things. And I really do think that hockey culture breeds an insularity, a fraternal culture of silence. It's true.
Yeah,
it just is, and they protect each other, and I guess that can be good in some instances, but in a lot of instances, it's protecting a lot of nasty stuff.
And for the women's team to say, please make sure we're involved in these conversations and have seats around the table. This is the important part of what we do next, right, in this industry. And a lot of, what's happening inside Hockey Canada, there's so many parallels to other things in the industry, right? Like, this is not just one organization. There are many that have these things that have all been swept under the rug before. So I'm curious,
right,
what your reaction to the statement from the women's team is, and how you would go about if you had a seat at the table. What would be some of the first things you'd want to see happen?
Well, I think a lot more unearthing has to happen.
Yeah.
I want to know, and there are, again, I guess this will be dated by the time it comes out, but there are a lot of, I just currently have a lot of questions, like these funds that were diverted to, to pay off, complainants. There are a lot of ethical bombshells that, first of all, I would just want to get to the bottom of who did
the
that.
Names.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If we're talking about how Hockey Canada needs to be reorganized and how this needs to be addressed, who decided that funds from hockey kids, from minor hockey kids can be diverted to create this slush fund? Like, who did this stuff? Because quite honestly, I don't think those people deserve to be in charge anymore. So, what would I do? I'd have to think long and hard, and I certainly wouldn't make any autonomous decisions. Yeah. But 100% that you have to involve You have to involve different faces, different people other than your typical hockey people. And it's not just women. It should be people of color. It should be people from the LGBTQ community. It should be people who from the disability communities. It should be everybody. Because I feel like there's just a lack of accountability when it's just one taste and it's all the same fraternity generationally.
You've done so many amazing interviews with people that are well-known and not well-known that fly under the radar, but is there an interview that like sticks out as someone from a marginalized community that you will never forget their story?
I remember the first time we went to Whitehorse, probably in our third year on Hometown Hockey, and we interviewed a trans man named Chase Blodgett, who was playing with the Whitehorse Women's Hockey League. And to, we knew it was a big deal to have Chase on our show. And again, it was one of those moments where, it wasn't about us. It was about Chase and Chase's story, but also the community of hockey, because the Whitehorse Women's Hockey League changed their rules basically for allowing a trans man to play with them. So it was just showcasing the beauty of the game and the beauty of the community surrounding the game. But I mean, gosh, we've had so many, it's so many. It's
the fact that you'll always remember the name and the place, though, that one will stick out for sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of women sitting around the table, we're seeing more and more women in leadership positions in sports. The Vancouver Canucks just hired their first female assistant GM in team history, Emily Castonguay. This summer, the Chicago Blackhawks promoted Megan Hunter to assistant GM. You've got Hayley Wickenheiser in the Toronto Maple Leafs, another summer promotion. I think we're at 5 female AGMs now. It's happening, but it's sort of a slow grind.
Oh, I mean, I think it's got to happen. This year alone it's been a lot better, and it's not just AGMs, it's directors of player development and other really important roles. I think it's got to happen faster, and I think it's hard loving this game sometimes, and sure. But the reason that everybody's still around and the reason that they're sticking with it is because they love it and because they believe that change can come. So sure, working for the Blackhawks organization right now would be hard. Working in hockey is hard. I think we all have moments where we just feel like, oh my God, I give up. But when you have seen the beauty of the game, then you can't turn your back.
What's been one of the most difficult times for you in the spotlight?
Well, this is probably recency bias, but, after, and I gave a whole diatribe about it, but it really was when the whole Kyle Beach story broke. And I got to give props to Rick Westhead. Full disclosure, he's my friend, but, the work that he has been doing, and now on Hockey Canada is incredible. But to me, Kyle Beach's story, or the emergence of it, really marked a whole bunch of red flags to me. And I found the NHL was kind of patting itself on the back about initiatives that it had put in place. Meanwhile, and I've said this all before, but, after George Floyd was murdered and there was a racial reckoning in the world of sports, I don't think the NHL used the word racism. It was hockey for equality, or just, it was just a little, it was just really safe. And just all these things were happening that the NHL just was not taking a leadership position in. And I was really discouraged when the Montreal Canadiens drafted Logan Mailloux in the first round of the 2021 draft. This is the kid who plays for the London Knights now, who was found to have distributed sexual images without consent when he was playing in Sweden. And I just thought, we are literally rewarding this person and his behavior. The first round, who thinks that's okay? And then after the whole Kyle Beach situation happened, initially when the story broke about the lawsuit itself, there was not a lot of media coverage, and for a variety of reasons. I think that there were some media who wanted to cover it and couldn't. I think that there is a lot of culture of like fear of upsetting the NHL and what the repercussions of that will be. But it wasn't nearly a big enough story, and that's why it was such an absolute bombshell when John Doe was revealed to be Kyle Beach and that big interview happened. So to me, I put myself squarely in the spotlight, but it wasn't for me. I think I reflected just a whole bunch of people and how they were feeling. But I certainly, I made a lot of enemies that day, the day that I spoke about it on Hometown Hockey.
You can almost hear like a little bit of the fear in your voice about that, but I also imagine that's one of your proudest moments as well.
Yes. I mean, I'm proud. Well, I'm proud that I was able to do that. And it's not just a personal pride. I'm proud of the show that I worked on, that, I am proud that I had an executive producer, Allison Redmond, who knew I was going to say something and didn't ask me what. Nobody asked me for a script. Nobody asked for me for anything. And I'm proud of my co-host, Ron McLean, for sitting there and letting me talk. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm proud that we had a show that was able to provide the platform for such a discussion.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, look at what Ron McLean's been through with people going off script. I'm sure this is one of the easiest ones he's dealt with.
Yeah. At least, yes. I think, he didn't have to have my back so much.
But you know what? You're touching on something that's really important in this industry, and that's like collaboration and the colleagues and the team that are with you for whatever it is, whether it's music or sports or whatever you're working on. Talk about what allows you to feel empowered.
I think it's two things. Well, no, it's not. It's more than two things. But I mean, two things that just come to mind. I mean, the support, right? Like Hometown Hockey is a perfect example where I just feel like everybody had each other's backs, from the very beginning. And so you feel propped up by that energy. And we've talked about this before. I mean, preparation.
Yeah.
Like being armed with knowledge and, research and
back up
thought.
The fire you're going to spit. Yeah,
exactly. So I think those two things. But again, for me, it's also just my personal journey and age. And being a mom, I think, has shifted the way that I approach the world and the difference that I want to make as well.
For sure. What about a time someone like opposite was not making you feel empowered and, as a matter of fact, made you like second guess yourself?
Well, I mean, I'm buying time with this drink of water because I have to think of what I can say. I'll just say that I think I've been punished sort of overtly and covertly for speaking my mind at times. I think there were some gigs I didn't necessarily get. But I think, one of the most kind of deflating experiences I had was after a Hometown Hockey Sunday night game. We all went out. I'm not going to say where we were. I'm not going to say who it was, but we were out. We typically would all go out for a bite to eat and a drink. And I was sitting at a table with my male colleagues and the guest that night, who happened to be a very high up in the NHL. And I literally was ignored in that conversation, not by my colleagues, but by this man who looked right past me. And those moments are enough to kind of really take the wind out of your sails. And I think only alluded to me once in the context of something very stereotypically feminine or something. But it was clear that I was not deemed worthy or educated enough to participate in this hockey-based conversation. And that certainly, I will never forget that.
Yeah, and how many women hearing what you're saying right now are saying, "Oh yeah, I've had that one too," right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And how did you deal with it?
I walked away.
Okay.
I just left. I mean, what was I going to say? I mean, I suppose, I could have been fiery about it, and I could have said, you know what, you just literally ignored me. But I didn't. I needed to take myself out of that space.
Yeah.
He was harshing my vibe.
Well, also after all the experience that you've had, part of it is knowing where to waste your energy, right? And where to put your energy.
Yeah. I mean, I have to create my own boundaries. I can't just always be mad.
With your daughter, has there ever been like a question that she asked about your work that you didn't know how to answer, something that maybe caught you off guard from her? Or something that was just so cute and curious that you were excited to talk about? Just, I imagine that you get lots of questions about your career.
Yeah, no, nothing that I can think of. I mean, off the top of my head, and probably when we're done, I'll be like, oh, it was this. She had sort of an interesting reaction. She was very not fazed at all by seeing me on TV. I mean, I started at Breakfast Television when she was 1. So she was, she's grown up really used to seeing that. So, but hockey for her became the thing that took me away from her. And so she actually it bred some resentment in her. So she really just wasn't very interested. So
I think that's another very common piece too, right? Because a lot of women are making choices about their careers. I remember Kayla Gray talked about this on the podcast too. And her thought was, well, as long as my son sees what I've done and what it took, I know that everything will be fine in the way that he'll think about my time away. What was it like going through like pregnancy and all of that in the spotlight for you?
Well, when I was pregnant, I had just finished, it was my transition between Sun TV, that little station, and Breakfast Television. So I was blissfully out of the spotlight at that time. Right. So it was when Audrey was 1 that I started at Breakfast Television. But I mean, so that was 5 years of waking up at 3 a.m. And then, then there was a crossover year where I was doing that and hometown hockey. And then, then a lot of years of leaving every weekend. So, I feel that. And, she noticed. she noticed. Yeah. And I think I'm ready. I can't imagine at this point what it would take to make me, take on another role that had that kind of sacrifice. I just don't have the fire. I have the fire to do good and important work, but I don't have the fire to do everything anymore. So
we're talking to you at a really interesting time. Well, what's still on the to-do list for you? Because most people don't even have one of the careers that you've had. So,
I certainly think I'm going to stay in hockey in some capacity. I think I'll definitely stay in sports. I'm what's interesting to me, and I'm sort of supplicating the universe. I want to do a bunch of stuff, and I'm hoping that the universe allows me to do that. I definitely am very passionate about the women in sports space and the equity in sports. I think that there's a lot to discover about that world. And, women in sports, women's sports are really still just limping along. There's so much work that needs to be done.
It's amazing they've somehow continued, right?
It is against all odds, really. So I think, but there are a lot of people doing amazing work. So I'm interested in diving in more, and I'll say academically only because I think there's a lot of learning to do, not because I want to go back to school or something. So I don't know. I'm sure I'll be in hockey in some capacity, but on camera, off camera, I'm not sure.
We don't know.
On camera a little bit.
So even a show like Your Top of Her Game, which I loved, You poured a lot of your heart and soul into that. Now you have an opportunity and some time. Like, could you see yourself creating something like that on your own, completely independent from a network?
From a network, for sure. I mean, I think I would always want to have some collaboration and know that I'm not making something entirely into the void. You know, I mean, there are a lot of people creating content out there, and I think
this is created literally in the void, just so we know.
But even, I think even for me, even getting the guests that I would want, it's a hard sell sometimes. So would I try to have a little bit of backing? Yes. Would it have to be a network? Absolutely not. I don't think that's not where the future is headed exclusively. I think that there's a lot of different opportunities. So would I love to continue doing something like that? Yes, absolutely.
Are people still asking you about Joydrop reunions?
Yeah, amazingly. I can't believe it. I'm so happy. I'm almost so much happier when people remember me from that than anything else, because it's so long ago. But I'm still friends with 2 out of the 3 guys. Like, we're super tight, and before the pandemic, we would do kind of like 1 reunion show a year. I'm not sure there's anything imminent, but next year, 2023, I can't believe this, is the 25th anniversary of our first single, Beautiful. So maybe something.
Oh my gosh. I remember watching all the videos on Much Music. To be honest, I didn't even connect you as the sports person to the musician. I did not put it together at all.
Yeah, so, well, it was a big gap between time. The timeline is like, whoop.
Okay, I wanted to go back to Top of Her Game for one more question here before I get you to nominate a couple women to come on this podcast. Okay. From Top of Her Game, can you tell me about a memorable guest that really opened up?
I mean, there are a lot, and I'll just give this an honorable mention because I was so nervous, but I was really scared about interviewing Christine Sinclair because she notoriously does not love doing interviews. She's a very private person, and I felt like we had a good interview, so I was very happy.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, so many. One that stands out to me was a former WWE wrestler named Gabby Tuft, who was who had just transitioned really pretty recently. She has since undergone a physical transition, but she was a big, buff, like hyper masculine wrestler, and that was a very vulnerable interview in a world that I think surprised a lot of people.
Where can people go to like watch back some of these interviews that we're mentioning?
I think unless they've removed them from their website.
Like on YouTube, right?
They should be at sportsnet.ca. I hope, I can't imagine they would have like erased me. Yeah. They should. No, they're sportsnet.ca. They should all live there.
Something we need to know about Ron MacLean that we don't know.
Well, I don't know if people don't know this, but I think his passion for music rivals his passion for hockey. Like, he is a music fanatic.
I've been lucky enough to interview him on like Canadian Country Music Awards red carpet and a couple events like that. And yeah, I would say that. Yeah, for sure.
Huge fan.
What's something geeky about his music collection? Who's he obsessed with? I only got like a minute with him,
I mean, we definitely don't share all the same taste in music. I don't know if it's geeky, but he loved, I think his favorite song is Baker Street. Really? At least is up there in his like all-time favorite songs, which is a great song.
Did he play sax growing up or like?
No, not at all. No. And I will say that he is an unabashed singer with like a questionable ear.
Is there a tape somewhere of you guys singing Sometimes Wanna Die?
Well, not that, but probably, I mean, we did one night, we did karaoke in Calgary, but it could exist somewhere. Somebody probably has it.
So funny. Okay, so the last segment of this podcast, who are some women who you completely admire in the spotlight in some way, shape, or form that you think would have amazing stories to tell on this podcast?
Well, the first one I'd love to nominate is an incredible woman named Shireen Ahmed, who I have learned so much from. And forgive me if you've had these women on. Shireen now works for the CBC as a senior reporter. She is also with a podcast called Burn It All Down, which is a group of women in sports media who do incredible work, and some academic, some, more reporting. Shireen really, as a Muslim woman, has been really dedicated to looking at racism in sport. And I learned so much from her all the time. So the next one, I want to nominate my dear friend Christine Simpson, who is
would love to have her.
One of the best hockey broadcasters this country has ever turned out, and one of the first women in the hockey world.
And she looks completely unfazed about her entire career. Like, it's just
she's so good. She's so perfect. She's beautiful. I love her. Her hair is always perfect also. So yes, not because her hair is perfect, but she should definitely, her whole family's hair is perfect, actually. It's not fair. And then I think another woman I would love to nominate, and this is someone who's younger, but really on her journey, is Chanel Keenan. Chanel she was just in a role with the Seattle Kraken as their intersectionality consultant, and she is a very strong. She's a disability advocate, but she's also she's amazing. So I would check her out.
With your boyfriend, he's got a whole NHL history too, right? And like you've spoken about your relationship a little bit. It must be an interesting household when you guys are together.
Yeah, it's touchy, right? Like he had a really long NHL career, and he is in that hockey fraternity. So we have, we don't always see eye to eye. I have some pretty definitive views, but we have some, we do some dancing around, but always have productive conversations, for sure.
That's what matters, right? It's cool to disagree, but let's be productive about it. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. This was an excellent interview. You aren't in the bad category. You're in the great category.
Oh, thank you so much. But honestly, I think there's many, many women in broadcasting who would love to follow in your footsteps. So,
well, thank you.
New episodes are back bi-weekly. And next up, the only Black woman programming country music in Canada. Back soon with Morgan James and her incredible story from hip-hop to now country. Thank you so much for listening.
This one time in Russia, I had boots with the fur and apple-bottom jeans before it was a thing.
This one time in Russia, my baba got mad at me for going out with wet hair.
This one time in Russia, I had to put on all the clothes in my suitcase because it was so cold.
And I should have listened to her because that same baba gave me a shot of vodka and a whole slice of lemon, rind and all, to cure my cold.
Well, if you're interested in these stories and more, come check us out at the Russian Sisters Podcast.
The Russian Sisters, available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and at therussiansisters.com.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.